I'm just like glad to meet you, and I'm always interested. I always love talking to film historian, critics or
Writer.
whatever. Film writer is a really the best way to put it. Uh, and I'm curious. Maybe we've met. I don't know. I just feel like you always been based in the Philadelphia area?
Actually, I started out at the Village Voice
You
in
did.
the late 70s,
Oh my goodness.
and
What,
first as an art critic and then as a movie critic. And then I went to the Boston Herald, and then I went to
wow.
the Philadelphia Inquirer. But
I
I
see.
I continued working for a lot of New York art and film publications, and have a lot of friends in New York, including two of them who you've recently had on the show, Phil Lopate and Susan Seidelman. And
That's awesome. Thank you for checking it
yeah.
out. Yeah. Uh, Philip was he's actually going to be up here in the next week or so to doing a introducing a film or something. I'm very excited because we were like he really enjoyed being on it. It turns out, which was such a you know, which was fantastic. If I can do that good a job, I'm always relieved. And
Well, he's the greatest guy and a really good
really
friend.
is. Yeah, he roots for the thing to work out. He's not trying to, in any way. Not that I would assume anybody was, but to undermine and to show like who's really knows more and that kind of stuff. It's all about like having a good conversation about something, and you know, I mean, once they know that you're not, I mean, I'm sure he would have been polite and courteous and all these things you're describing to just about anybody who, was friendly and interested. But if you actually know, a fair amount of what you're talking about, then he's like, oh, let's have some fun talking about this stuff, which is nice.
And his book is amazing. I mean, I'm I've seen a lot of movies,
Yeah, me
but
too.
Philip has written like God knows how many books, and he's seen more than I have. And he's not that much older than I am. So it's unfair. And he retains it. He can remember titles, which, although
Right.
he was never a daily reviewer, so I've got that on him.
Well, right. And one other thing is he's still he's still turned on. He's still interested and excited by films. All these years later, he's not quite the um, cynic that you could see people becoming. In terms of the popular film entertainment.
Yeah, I actually quit film criticism twice because of that cynicism.
Yeah. Well,
Well, to
that's
quit daily criticism. I just remember in the 80s, there are all these young boy, young boy buddy movies, and I just felt that I had to be, and I genuinely like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but there's a lot of not so good ones. And I just felt like I had to change my gender and lop 20 years off my age to understand anything that was going on in these movies.
the appeal.
So,
And that was the first time. What was the second?
uh, I guess when I left the Inquirer, it's just the volume of movies getting released. It kind of went from during my tenure at the Philadelphia Inquirer, movies went from about 136 a year to about 500 a year. And there's no way you could keep up.
You weren't
And
no.
50% of them were not necessary. You know, uh,
Low budget indies being
well, I mean, I like most indie movies, but there were beginning to be some indie movies I wasn't liking so much. Just there's just a lot of money around, so a lot was getting made, and I just couldn't keep up. I couldn't see, you know, 8 movies a week.
Right.
Um, and whatever.
I understand. But here
Um,
you are writing about film.
yeah. Yeah, just when I get out, they bring me back in. So
Exactly. Well, I mean, this one makes sense given your background, and how could this not be like like kind of a love letter project, right?
I didn't expect I wanted to write the book for not obvious reasons. Although I loved Varda movies, um, I was surprised at how much TV work she did that I didn't know that was fantastic. I was not going to galleries a lot in the 2000 uh early 2000s and the 2010s just because I wasn't.
You're
And
referring to the installations.
yeah, and I mean I knew that she was doing installations, but I hadn't really studied them or seen them. And the TV work and that was totally bonus. I was surprised by how much I like them and how fascinating they were. But I wanted to write about her because I thought I could tell the story of female directors through her life and the the triumphs and obstacle course and so there were so many things that were bonuses that I hadn't known. You think a filmography is a director. It's not. Their life is their lives and their struggles are also the director. And you don't know that from watching his or her movies. So
Mm,
that was a surprise. And uh the also Varda was a film director for 65 years, which is kind of amazing considering that what Steven Spielberg is 77 or 78 and he's only been directing for like 52 years.
mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm,
when he's 90, will he have directed 65 years? I don't know.
mm-hmm. Did you have did you have occasion to to meet Agnes?
Yes, I met her 3 times. Uh, the first time was at the Cannes Film Festival. I mean, she was always at Cannes,
Mm-hmm.
um, scouting out new production money, uh, talking to film buyers from different markets about, acquiring her work. Um, she's what I hadn't really known is what a great businesswoman she was.
Yeah, that's what sort of emerges from this.
And actually, both she and Francois Truffaut were incredible business people, but Truffaut had a dedicated producer, so he wasn't looking for money all the time. Varda was, and when she couldn't get that money, she still made movies somehow. She went digital like Bob Dylan went uh, electric, and she was interesting. But in any case, I met her first at the Cannes Film Festival at the annual luncheon given by Unifrance, which is the export agency for French cinema. And we were seated next to each other. I think largely because we were the only 2 women there. Janet Maslin wasn't there that year, so from the Times. So they seated us together. And she looked at me and she said, I was hoping for the New York Times and I get the Philadelphia Inquirer. She says that with a,
Wow.
I don't know whether she meant to be funny, but I I took offense and I was very quiet. And she said, "Spell your last name for me again." And I spelled it. And she said, "Ah, I knew the name." And I said, "How do you know the name?" She said, "You wrote an article for Art in America about the LA murals, and it was utile. It was useful when I
Feel
made the movie Murmure about the murals in Los Angeles." So I think that when she saw that we kind of shared an enthusiasm, she got nicer. But so
do you
that
think
was the
she meant?
first time.
Do you think
Pardon me?
she meant to be rude, or that's
I
not?
think that she was she spoke her mind.
Yeah,
Um maybe she meant to be funny and I don't get French humor. Uh, who knows? But I was younger and more sensitive then. Um the second time I met her was at another uh luncheon at Cannes given by Unifrance 10 years later. And the third time I met her was in Philadelphia when she was doing what others called master classes, but what she called encounters uh, at a Scribe Video in West Philadelphia, which is a uh,
resource center or
media
yeah,
resource center. And there were about 90 people there, ranging in age from like 16 to 80, who wanted to hear what she had to say about filmmaking. And she was just awesome. I mean, I'd never, I'd conversed with her before, but I could never seen her stage presence. I mean, it's in the movies, but it was just very powerful. And she was telling them, don't get worried about your equipment. You know, you don't need a 35 millimeter camera. You don't need a 16 millimeter camera. Borrow a digital camera, use your phone. If you have a good idea, it doesn't matter how you shoot it. You need the idea and you need a point of view. And that was such a relief for everyone there because they thought they needed the latest in technology. And she's just a really good speaker in so many languages. And she's such a good punster in so many languages. And so she was entertaining and she was really instructional. And like her late documentaries, she never was dogmatic or telling you what to think. She wanted you to have your own opinion. She did the research, you get to have the opinion. And that was
mm.
very democratic, I thought. Are you
Well,
looking something up?
I was just looking. I was just want to make sure I got a title right because yeah, faces, places. Yeah. So, well, my one time, and I'm just sharing this for the hell of it, but was I'm sure early on when you were a young, up and coming critic of film, especially in the film sphere, you probably were at least offered if you didn't take up like like roundtable interview types of opportunities
Oh
or
no, I
junkets.
was really lucky. I'm a little older than that. I mean, that tradition existed while I worked, but for a long time, I worked for a newspaper that had a huge circulation. So I was in the top five group. So I never had
Nice.
to go to the circle jerks.
Thank you for it's a good
I'm sorry.
description. No, no, it's a good
I think I
description.
did that. I was in one with Arthur C. Clarke when the movie
Oh,
2010 came out, or whatever the sequel
oh boy. Yeah.
to
2010. Yeah.
it was
Ray
2010.
Scheider. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only one I did, and
Mm.
I wasn't a sci-fi girl, and I didn't really like the movie that much. I was writing about it, so I just wrote off other people's questions. I maybe
That's like
asked one.
81 or something.
I'm
No, a
old.
little later than that, maybe 83, 84. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm not young.
well, because when I started, and I was not a film journalist by any stretch, but um, I just sort of I it was my entryway was part of like inuring myself to the press, the publicists, etc., was to agree to do some of these. So I probably did about, I don't know, 15. I don't remember. I did a bunch of the finding them completely useless rather, except that there would be some interesting occasions, and you'd be seated with Bill Murray and Sissy Spacek or something, which was pretty cool. But found most of them to be kind of embarrassing because the nature of the way people would talk to the subjects, etc., and they just weren't very useful. So I stopped doing them many, many, many years ago. But um, I did agree to do one more, which one last time, which was when Phases Places came out, and I was invited to do a roundtable type of thing with Agnès and JR, and it was literal. I was probably it was probably at the offices of Cohen Media or something, and and it really was almost like a round table, or I'm sure it wasn't, but I was seated next to her, to her left, and Jr. was on the other side flanking her, and he was taking pictures, and then so I was trying to sneak in some pictures, but I just had this, I must have the whole recording of that whole thing, but that was a wonderful experience just to kind of not knowing there really wasn't going to be very much I could do with this material. So I kind of felt like I was cheating, by being there, maybe taking somebody else's place or something. But it was an opportunity to sit there, and she was being very funny, and I think just having JR there kind of help her feel like that you know that much more free to do that, because he was kind of
Well, that was, fairly late in her life,
very, yeah, very much so.
and her sight was not very good. She had macular degeneration, and
Mhm.
sometimes she needed someone to help her not bump into the furniture.
Yeah,
And so that made her feel good. And otherwise she was very bossy. And
yeah, yeah,
I mean, she was like Napoleon. She was this 5 foot giant.
sure.
And although it turns out that Napoleon was actually 5'6",
Yeah, I
but
heard that recently. That's so
yeah, I
funny.
read that recently.
Yeah.
But she owned her own power, as they say in feminist circles. And she was very commanding.
Was it difficult? I mean, she's written her own memoir, right? So you,
Well, she wrote a, it's not a conventional book. It's
mhm.
um it's photographs with long and short captions. And she always claimed she didn't have a good memory. And I would claim that she told parts of the truth.
Mm.
And so she claimed that she didn't remember anything of her childhood. And it's fortunately during COVID, my researcher in France got to interview her brother. So I had some sense of her childhood.
Right.
But I think she thought of herself, she was very self-made and very rebellious. And her mother was the daughter of a family of 12, in a family of 12 kids. Her father was an Episcopal minister, but her grandparents, her parent, uh,
Hmm.
mother's grandparents owned a very big shipping line.
Oh,
So there was some kind of money and position in her mother's background. And her father was from he was born in Turkey, but he was Greek. And uh he came from a family of doctors, and he came to France for his education. He became an engineer, and he was hugely successful. And I think both, I think her father just wanted her, you know, to get her, go to college, get her
Mhm.
degree,
Right.
and find a man to marry and have kids. And she wanted the kids part, but she didn't want the rest of it.
Yeah.
And her mother was really supportive. Her mother, who loved art and was interestingly very hard of hearing, but she really looked at art and introduced Agnes to art. I think her mother was very, very supportive. And I would like to know more about that relationship and, you know, how her mother, took her to see altarpieces, the altarpiece of Ghent, and what she said about it. And, I think from her childhood, her mother was taking her to museums and
Right.
churches to see art, and that made a fairly large impression on Varda. And interestingly, after Varda went to the School of the Louvre to, study art history and anthropology, um, her mother went to the École du Louvre to learn more about art history, and her daughter Rosalie also went to the École du Louvre. So that, I mean, they were, the matrilineal part of her family was very interested in art. Her father was very practical. He was an engineer. And oddly enough, basically, if you have a Venn diagram, the overlap between Agnes and her father, excuse me, I'm calling her Agnes for the American audience.
Right.
You are
Agnes.
pronouncing her name correctly.
Yeah.
The overlap between Agnes and her father is his inventions all involve tracking, tracks, and Agnes loved a tracking shot, and cranes, for those. And her father's business, or her father's patents, were all about building devices that could load things onto ships and off ships and into markets and out of markets.
Hmm.
So Agnes used the same tools and things as her father, but for a very different purpose.
Yeah.
And her father, she thought her father was just bourgeois, and Agnes was, I guess, a born bohemian.
I really particularly enjoyed the Hollywood the Hollywood years. Boy, did she
Could
just
you
kind of
not?
what?
How could you not enjoy
I
that?
know it's just spectacular. Well, her marriage to Demi, kind of and those years, he was um boy, you have a lot of respect for him, like that he chose this powerhouse to be married to. You know, he didn't go for some Pollyanna type, that's for sure. But
He
anyway,
sure
the
loved them in his movies.
what's that?
I mean, I think
Yeah.
Demi's idea of female beauty, was Dominique Sanda, Catherine Deneuve, Anouk Aimée. He liked extremely beautiful women.
Hmm. Which
Uh,
weren't hard to find in the French, casting, world, I suppose.
uh,
I
Beautiful
mean,
women.
I'm more partial to Jean Moreau
Uh,
and her kind of whiskey, smoky,
well,
voice,
actually,
and
A Agnes had that voice too. I mean,
yeah.
she was a heavy, heavy smoker. And there's a story about I think in the 1990s she was asked to do a stop smoking public service announcement
For who?
for French TV.
Okay.
And the day she shot it, I think everyone in her office kind of started putting up photographs of her, with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. And she was very offended because she too was going to stop smoking.
Oh,
My favorite pictures of her are on the set with a cigarette dangling from her mouth, talking to the cigarette and telling people, I want the camera there. Um, but yes, she loved California. Uh, I mean, she loved everything about it. She loved, she herself had lived in the south of France for many years,
Mhm.
when they escaped Belgium during World War II. And I mean, as I'm from Los Angeles, and I know the similarities between the Mediterranean climate in the south of France and
Yeah,
the Mediterranean climate in the south of California. And of course she liked it. It smelled great. There's jasmine and palm trees dancing everywhere.
eucalyptus
And
and jacaranda trees,
yeah, no,
whatever,
it was
cactus.
great. It was great. It was the south of France in the middle of the whole yeah, the movie industry.
Right.
And but I think we should talk about her circle of friends, which is astonishing. I mean, here is a woman who born in Belgium, raised a few years in France, and whose friends included Simone de Beauvoir, the great French philosopher and writer, um, Jim Morrison, who not a lot of people remember. He was a UCLA film student before he became the frontman of the Doors, and he adored her.
Right.
Uh, she took Harrison Ford's first screen test because she was trying to get him cast in
Cast
one
in
of Demi's
model shop.
movies.
Right.
Yeah. And she befriended Huey Newton while making a movie about the Black Panthers. So who has this kind of social network before social networks were a thing?
Hmm.
Um, she she was a celebrity magnet, and people just loved her because she was incredibly entertaining. And
Intelligent and entertaining and blunt and talented. Right. That's can be very sexy, alluring.
and she had a lot of talents that most directors lack. I mean, she could talk about her work with such intelligence and accessibility. She was very charismatic. She was extraordinarily well read in news, in literature, in gossip, and could use that to her advantage conversationally. She was very, very impressive. And, since I had conversations with her a handful of times, that was very, very interesting. Um, she I mean, everyone who worked with her said she basically could do everything on a set from editing to cinematography to writing music to writing lyrics for songs, um, art direction. She did it all.
Mm.
And the only reason she hired other people to do it is because producing, directing, and distributing your own movies is very exhausting. So she needed help in some aspect.
Yeah, a little bit here and there. Um, there, but you know what? I'm not getting is necessarily that she was that warm, but
Actually,
humor can
to people she liked, she could be
she could be
extremely
very
warm.
affectionate, or I mean,
Um,
humor and intellect can really compensate a lot. By the way, for you know that, and so I'm not criticizing.
I mean, I suggest I mean, I've watched her memorial. There was a memorial for her the day
What
she
was
was
it?
buried. I would commend to anyone to watch her memorial service at the Cinémathèque Francois the morning of her burial and to see Sandrine Bonnier on the stage, saying effectively that, dearest Agnes, when you found me, I was just a bud, the flower of the moment. But you you taught me how to stand tall like a tree. And you watch that, and that certainly comes from the heart, and you cry. You see Catherine Deneuve read this incredible poem by Baudelaire, who was her favorite poet, with such intensity that it kind of summons Agnes's spirit. It was, she was beloved. She was beloved by the people in her neighborhood. She was beloved by celebrities around the world. Um, she didn't like working with famous actors because she didn't, it was hard for
They
her to tell
require
them
certain
what
work
to do.
with
Pardon
it in
me?
terms. Well, they require certain. They're used to a
Yeah.
certain amount of attention in a particular
And
way.
and
Yeah.
compromise, and yes. And Agnes liked what she wanted. She knew what she
Right.
wanted. But actors loved her. They uh and she made a not great movie called 101 Nights. It was about the made on the centenary of motion pictures. And Robert De Niro was one of the American actors she asked to be in it. And he had a couple paragraphs of dialogue that she wrote for him. And before he landed in France the morning he was supposed to be on the set, he had memorized it all in perfect French
Oh wow.
to, because he
He,
wanted
he
to be great for
wanted
her.
to, yeah, make her happy. That's amazing.
And he did his scenes were with Deneuve, and it's really beautiful. The movie's
Yeah.
not good, but there's some moments that is just lovely, and it's it's a very understated De Niro performance. He knew exactly what she wanted, and I would have liked to have seen a collaboration with Varda and De Niro. And Varda also essentially discovered Gerard Depardieu, and she was going to make a movie with him called A Christmas Carol.
I remember. Yeah.
And the she did a sizzle reel with a couple scenes with Depardieu and the actress whose name was Carol, which is why it's called A Christmas Carol. And he's great. And I mean, you see who Depardieu is going to become. And it's very exciting. And I'm sorry they never worked together. And I'm sorry she never worked with Harrison Ford, because
Mhm.
she and Jacques really saw something. He'd been in a couple small roles in movies, but it really took um, George Lucas. Well, it actually wasn't George Lucas, it was Fred Roos, who is a casting director who saw that uh, Ford's dry humor and the way he kind of was so laid back that he makes the audience come to him, and
Mhm.
she
Mhm.
she got it. She understood the metaphysics of acting,
Well, yeah.
and yet the acting isn't great in her movies, which is why she loved working with non-professionals, because they were real, and that's a
Right.
that's a quality she liked. And they didn't know how to act, they knew how to be, and that's what
Right.
she wanted in her movies.
Wow. Well, this is you could talk
Hold up
about
the book
this.
more. Hold up the book.
Yeah, well, I'm going to now plug it because I'm going to this is the book. It's called The Complicated Passion, the Life and Work of Agnès or Agnes Varda. And it's written by Carrie Rickey and published by Norton. Um, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's just a wonderful book about a filmmaker, an artist in this particular. Just so much of her life was just so astounding. This book is relatively slim considering what it could have been, but I mean,
We wanted to save paper.
I appreciate it. But I loved it, and I really strongly
Thank
recommend
you.
it. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your thoughts and feelings about it. I can see there's another, I think there might be another book in here that for you, rather, another book,
About Agnes?
maybe. I know you may want to move on, but
Well, no, I think the great thing about writing about Agnes is that here is someone who some some people are addicts. Some are addicted to fentanyl, some are addicted to pot, some are addicted to whiskey,
mhm,
but she was addicted to art. That's
mm,
what I don't know that the end product was always as crucial to her as the act of making and what that made her feel. The
sure,
the
developing as
freedom, the intellectual concerns, the communication, movies and art allowed her to communicate with the world.
right.
And her ideas are mostly pretty accessible for their, despite or because of their intellectual complications and engagement. But I think she managed to be both avant-garde and accessible, which is something I like
Me
in
too.
filmmakers, experimenting, but not condescending.
Hmm. That's a really good way of putting it. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to meet you. I hope we have a chance to do this again. You know, I'll be
Uh,
on time.
if I
All right.
ever write another book, but I'll just add one thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, no.
Every time I thought I cannot finish this because I wrote it during COVID,
Right.
or I began it during COVID, and I thought I would never be able to get into archives and this and that. I kept on thinking, what would Agnes do? She would just
Forge
push
ahead
through,
regardless.
push
Right.
ahead.
I love it. So she was your muse as well as your subject.
Inspiration,
Inspiration.
not artistic, but
Yeah.
professional.
Got it.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Well,
And
thank you, Adam.
yeah, this was a pleasure.
Likewise.
All right. Take care. Have a great day.
You too. I'm glad your car is healthy.
Thank you for putting up with all that. Great.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye now. Thank